Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've been enjoying JNUC so far. I'm Tom, and I'll be your host today. Our first session is Tap to Login. So please welcome Josh Jagdfeld and Adam Derrick.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Well, so first things first, the name of our session is huge. Hope you can write that all down, but it's nice to meet you all and to see you all here. I'm Josh Jagdfeld. I am Vice President of Alliances at SwiftConnect, former Jamf for about 10 years, so it's kind of good to be back with the family and in the community. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces.
And I'm Adam Derrick. I'm a solutions engineer here at Jamf, focusing on identity.
So first questions first. Who here in their organization is using shared devices in any capacity? All right, a decent number. Yeah, I was expecting to see a decent number of folks, but I think admittedly too, shared devices can be pretty hard, right? You have to know who the users are, you have to make sure they get the right content, that they have everything they need to do their job while they're using those shared devices. And so for many years, as Apple has built out more and more technology around these capabilities, we have seen more and more use cases for shared devices enter the mainstream. And this year, I'm super excited to be here to talk about using shared devices through the context of the Mac. Something I think many people have done for a long time, but with the new tap to login workflow, it couldn't be easier than ever. How many of you saw the WWDC session about tap to login in the What's New with MDM overview? Excellent. Well, so you're probably familiar with this video. The concept is really simple. To use a shared Mac with Authenticated Guest Mode, now with macOS Tahoe, you can walk up to a Mac with a connected USB reader, tap your employee badge in Apple Wallet, and have that authentication session actually driven through the credential on your phone. Very, very similar, for those of you who might be familiar with it, to smart card-based workflows. But the idea here is that users don't have to use a username and password. They don't have to use any other capability other than just taking their phone, tapping it to a reader, and they're ready to go based on who they are. So this is all brand new capability that has shipped with macOS Tahoe. A lot of this is underpinned by technologies that have been rolled out across the last couple of years. You're going to hear some themes that you've heard about at JNUC before. Adam has got a bunch of session content today and tomorrow about some of these technologies. And what we're doing is putting them together for the first time into a cogent workflow around Authenticated Guest Mode for macOS. So how does that all work, Adam?
Yeah, let's talk through. The first component that is required is Platform SSO. So this session is going to cover a number of topics. Platform SSO, mobile device management, aka MDM, credential provider, Apple accounts, identity provider, and then NFC reader hardware. So let's dive into Platform SSO. So Platform SSO is getting significant buzz this year at JNUC. We do have a session coming up right after this one, Platform SSO to Next Frontier, where you can learn the basics of Platform SSO if you're not too familiar with it. But with Platform SSO, you could build extensions that integrate your organization's identity provider into the Mac setup experience. So this allows your users to authenticate with their corporate credentials from the very beginning. If you scan a QR code on the screen, that's going to take you to jamf.it/PSSO, the new home for everything Platform SSO from Jamf. So Platform SSO activates during automated device enrollment to handle authentication, manage Apple account sign-in, and local user creation in one streamlined setup. It provides seamless single sign-on across native and web apps with status monitoring available in system settings for easy troubleshooting. You could sync local account passwords with your IDP and define login policies centrally, while mapping your IDP group permissions to macOS and supporting network-only accounts for contractors as well as temporary access. The system auto-creates your local accounts on the Mac when a user logs in with their IDP credentials. This eliminates the tedious pre-provisioning tasks. Keep in mind that most of the features do require corresponding support from your identity provider.
So ultimately, Platform SSO is designed to be a technology that empowers you to use the digital identity of the user who's walking up to the workstation to derive all kinds of benefits, who they are, the things that they need access to, starting a single sign-on session, taking all kinds of cruft and friction out of that user experience so the person just walks up to the machine, Once they log in, they have everything they need, all the apps, all the access to content, single sign-on, and they're ready to go. But there's a lot behind the scenes. And specifically, what we're here to talk about today as part of the Platform SSO value chain is this last component, Authenticated Guest Mode, new this year in macOS, and how Platform SSO can allow a temporary user, somebody who doesn't have a local account on the machine or a permanent account on the machine, to use the same things that we've enjoyed with Platform SSO in the past for permanent users on a machine, but for that temporary use case. In the sense that when I walk up to the machine and I authenticate, I have an account that's created just in time, and when I'm done, that account is actually removed from the device, and when the next person comes up to use the device, the same thing happens over and over again. So I don't have a ton of user accounts. I don't have a bunch of things that I have to manage there. It's all created and deleted just in time based on the needs of the user. But there's another technology that helps to underpin PSSO, of course. Adam, tell us about MDM.
Yeah, who here is a Jamf customer? I hope everybody in the room. So MDM is a core component. When building out Platform SSO, a configuration profile is required. So we need to make sure that we include these key configuration profile options. So we need to set the platform type to SSO. We need an extension identifier, a team identifier. We need to set our sign-in type to redirect, our associated URLs for redirects. Use Platform SSO, we need to go ahead and toggle that on. We need to specify the auth method. We need to have it display the account name, and then we need to do some user mappings. So here at Jamf, we spend a lot of time making sure that we provide the best experience in the configuration profiles. So if you haven't taken a look at the Platform SSO settings within config profiles, definitely go explore that.
So let's then draw some conclusions about how Platform SSO plays into Authenticated Guest Mode. Well, first of all, the most important thing to know about Authenticated Guest Mode is that it's brand new with macOS Tahoe. And so if you've ever done these temporary user workflows before, you've had to kind of do it in probably less straightforward ways. Now Apple has provided the native framework to be able to create these just-in-time accounts, provision it with the apps that they need, using your digital identity to drive that user experience. The important part, like Adam mentioned before, though, is that, of course, all of this is driven through your identity provider. So that user account and their eligibility to log into the Mac is now derived by their eligibility through their digital identity versus having a user account on the machine. So, of course, identity providers are a key part of this experience, and we have been working closely with many of the providers in the space, like Microsoft and Okta and others. And so we are going to move on now to the concept of a credential provider. Has anybody here in this room heard of this term around the physical access space, credential providers? A couple nodding heads. OK, so the part that's probably foreign to everybody in this room that you've not interfaced with is this notion of the physical badge playing a part in your Mac authentication workflow. And this chart is a very simple diagram of what SwiftConnect does as a credential provider or a credential manager for physical access credentials. And maybe it seems a little more complicated than it actually is. What I'll describe to you here is Access Cloud in the middle is the SwiftConnect platform in the back end that links together a lot of disparate systems that are not, unfortunately, connected today through a lot of the modern standards that we all appreciate and experience on a day-to-day basis in modern enterprise productivity software, things like SAML, SCIM, OIDC. These concepts don't exist in the physical security world. So every one of these downstream systems where you have users and entitlements and need to derive access, they all live in silos. So the SwiftConnect platform exists to connect all of these things through API-based integrations and other technologies so that those same expectations you have about how a user's identity can derive all of their access into all the connected systems can work with physical access as well. Dean said it best a couple of years ago at JMAC. He said, we think the Office should just be another app. And in many senses, that's exactly what this platform looks to do. But in this diagram, we show a lot of infrastructure that is like doors and secure printers and lockers and landlord facilities. None of that has to do with our topic today around authenticated guest mode. So if you actually pare back this diagram of how the systems interrelate, and you look at what the core components are for a credential provider to be able to provide you with that employee badge to use for authenticated guest mode, there's really just a couple of common linkages here. We have Microsoft Entra ID here as an example of an identity provider that somebody might have. Of course, that is probably the most important part of determining entitlement to be able to derive a credential on the device. If the user can't authenticate, they probably shouldn't have a badge for my organization, right? So we connect to an IDP through SCIM, and we use modern authentication protocols. You're able to do anything that you need to validate that that user is who they say they are with two-factor. And then once they press Add to Wallet, we work with Apple Pay, Google Pay servers, Samsung Pay to be able to put a credential in the wallet application of the user's phone and on their paired smartwatch, whether it's an Apple Watch or whatever it might be, so that then they have a provisioned pass that works the same as maybe the physical plastic card that they used to have, but it's been entitled based on them being an eligible employee with their modern authentication credentials, just like they would get access to any other system for their organization. So in the most basic sense, what we're doing is being able to essentially give you kind of like a smart card on your phone or give you a credential that you can use to challenge your authentication at the macOS login window.
Josh, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So let's say that I want to use Tap to log in on my Mac and I have an Android phone.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. There is a credential standard that's being used in the Tap to login workflow that is a little bit different maybe than under other credential standards you've known or used in the past. So those of you who are carrying around physical plastic cards today, more than likely what you have is a credential that has been derived from a provider that uses shared private key encryption. What that means is maybe the HID of the world or Allegiant or Wavelengths, these people who create credentials, they have a private key that they store on your behalf. They put it in all of their readers, and every time you present that card, the reader decrypts the payload, and then it's able to pass on the information about who you are as a user. In the new workflow with Tap to Login, Apple has actually pushed forward a new technology called Aliro, which you can visit if you go to csa-iot.org, or you just search for ALIRO on Google. You will be able to read about the Aliro credential standard. And what's different is that it is asymmetric encryption. So your device actually holds the private key. The secure enclave on your device derives that encryption, creates the credential, and then when you present that credential to a reader, it doesn't have to decrypt the payload. We actually are using a signed public key certificate with your identity provider to say, hey, when I provisioned this credential, I gave you that certificate. Now you're seeing that certificate, you know who it is, and you can derive whether this person should have access or not. So dramatically more secure because you don't have to trust readers and all of these other little devices with private keys everywhere. And the impetus is on the device security to be able to keep that credential secure. Now there's another core technology that ties in here that is really important for credentials and Apple Wallet in particular, and that is Apple accounts. Anybody here have experience with managed Apple accounts, or nightmares about managed Apple accounts, or love letters to write to Apple about managed Apple accounts? Well, there is yet another great use case for managed Apple accounts here. Obviously, account-driven user enrollment and many other methods of being able to leverage managed Apple accounts in a corporate setting have played out over many years, but now Apple Wallet is yet another use case where an Apple account is required to be able to store a credential in Apple Wallet. And there's one thing that I'll call out here in particular, and because this is Apple specific, any of you who have an iPhone can see this. If you open up your Apple Wallet in your iPhone and you've ever added a credit card or a payment card of some sort, and you've also added an airline pass or an event ticket, what you'll see is that there is a fold. It's like the billfold where it folds in your wallet. There's a blank space, and everything that's above that blank space is actually associated with an Apple account and also has a secure enclave encrypted credential associated with it. Everything below it is just a pass, an Apple Wallet pass that doesn't have to have encryption, and so it can be managed in a much different framework. Apple Wallet employee badge is obviously above the fold because we have an encrypted credential. So managed Apple accounts can be a key part of this strategy, especially if your organization doesn't allow personal Apple accounts on devices. You do have to have an Apple account on a device to be able to use employee badge and Apple Wallet. Now, there's no reason, on BYOD phones, you couldn't use personal Apple accounts, and corporate-owned phones, you can use managed Apple accounts or whatever mix and match that you so choose, but the user does have to have an Apple account to be able to use employee badge and Apple Wallet. You can learn a whole lot more about managed Apple accounts, of course, by going to apple.com and searching for details. And of course, either of us would be happy to talk more about it as well. Let's talk about the IDP connection, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing when it comes to Platform SSO is the identity provider supporting the authentication mechanism. So whether that's secure enclave or password sync, authenticated guest mode, you need support from your identity provider. So your identity provider needs to provide that support for Platform SSO, including the macOS smart card login workflows. Additionally, you'll need the ability to associate a public key that holds an encrypted certificate with an identity record for the authentication verification.
So we've got Platform SSO, MDM, credential provider. We've got Apple accounts. We've got an IDP. There's one last part of this chain to make all these things work together, and then we'll kind of connect it all towards the end. And that is a connected reader. So today, Apple does ship NFC reading capability in iPhone. They don't have that capability in iPad or Mac, and so one of the requirements is to be able to connect a USB reader, like you've seen in many settings today. If you've ever gone to a healthcare institution or you've ever gone to a lot of retail facilities, you'll see that there is a workstation with a reader attached to it. It's very similar for this workflow as well. And there are many examples of these kind of readers out in the world today. You've probably seen one of these at least. The ones on the right and the ones on the left are very common in that healthcare setting that I mentioned before. These are USB-connected readers. There are also wall-mounted readers that have support for the Aliro credential standard. So manufacturers are part of this Aliro Credential Alliance. It is an open standard. Many people have announced or are shipping support for Aliro this fall. And so as you are looking for hardware partners, folks like HID, Wavelinks, RFID, as the examples up here on the screen, will have models that support the workflow. So it's kind of it's up to you to choose what you want. But I think the important things to keep in mind about these readers are a couple of things. First of all, there is major commitment from the players. They are all a part of the Aliro Standards Alliance, so this is not a kind of random technology that nobody's going to support. It is widely adopted. Both Apple and Google are part of the alliance, as many of the physical access companies are. Important to note, it's connected via USB. So you're obviously plugging these into the Mac through a cable. It's not Bluetooth or anything like that. And then the last couple things here are that there is a firmware certification process that Apple requires for the reader manufacturers to go through called Enhanced Contactless Polling 2.0, ECP 2.0. And what that is essentially a requirement around testing and validation of the reader's performance within a certain range and with devices at certain angles and things like that to be able to ensure that the user experience is exactly as someone would expect if they were presenting a card to a reader, so that you don't ever have the situation where somebody walks up and they're holding it wrong, or they got to take their case off, or they have to open an app and wait, or something like that. The goal here is to replicate a process that everybody's familiar with. You tap it to the reader, it beeps, you don't have to think twice about it, and it just works. And then finally, the other part about ECP2 is it allows you to enable something called Express Mode. Have any of you ever been on public transit where you just walk up to the subway terminal, you go boop, and you walk on, and you're ready to go? Anybody done that before? Yeah, so you're using a payment form. You're using a card and Apple Wallet that is allowing you to not have to prove who you are before you're able to use it. Your screen can be off. Your device can actually even be dead. But when you tap the device to the reader, because Express Mode is turned on, you don't have to double tap to pull up the badge. You don't have to authenticate with Face ID. You can just silently tap your phone or your Apple Watch without having to wake it up, and it just works. So importantly, readers who have gone through the ECP2 certification are able to offer Express Mode, which I think most of us would admit is exactly the experience we'd like our users to have, not have to choose credentials and fiddle around with their wallet to figure out which one they need. So a lot of announcements will be coming in the reader manufacturer space here within the coming months. Like I said before, we've been working with HID and RFID and Wavelinks and a lot of these major providers to make sure that we have support alongside this release and the Aliro credential standard ratification in the next month or so. So if we put this all together, it's been a lot of stuff, and there's a whole lot of concepts here. But in the most basic sense, this is sort of the workflow from left to right in the order of operations. First of all, you have to have MDM configured to allow your device to know what to do with PSSO. All of the configuration profile settings that Adam mentioned put the device into a state where it knows what to do when it has a authenticated login session request at the beginning of the user experience. The IDP then obviously plays a critical part because it is receiving the request for authentication and has to validate the user. So your identity provider is a critical part of this workflow. The credential manager is like SwiftConnect, where somebody can derive the actual physical access card in your wallet using the Apple, Google, and Samsung wallet platforms to be able to put that Aliro credential in the wallet application. The IDP then sees that credential with its encrypted public key certificate at the authentication session for the login window, is able to derive who the user is, and even potentially figure out who they are, what they need, and change what gets loaded onto the Mac when they log in. The NFC hardware is what the user is tapping that credential to do the authentication session on the Mac. The IDP then, of course, derives that user, logs them in, allows them into the Mac, and begins the single sign-on session. So all supported applications downstream have already logged the user in so long as the single sign-on extension is configured. And then, of course, macOS does the rest, and the user's in their session. They can use it for the duration of their workflow, or as long as they need to use the Mac. And then as soon as they log out, that user account is deleted, doesn't exist on the device anymore, and the next person can walk up to the machine, badge in, and get exactly what they need, start their single sign-on session, get all the apps pre-installed, any content that they need, and that workflow can just go over and over and over again. So we think that there's a couple of particular industries or vertical markets where this is probably going to be very interesting. The first probably seems pretty obvious. Anybody here work in the healthcare space? Had a lot of interest from healthcare providers here. Our clinicians, nurses, doctors are all using machines in different rooms throughout all kinds of different times of the day and need to very quickly access information. A lot of these organizations, like you saw yesterday, Emory Healthcare, as an example, Jeremy Butcher mentioned them in the keynote, have these whole Mac innovation centers and Apple innovation centers where they're using a lot of this technology. So we think in particular healthcare is a very interesting place for the application of this. We also think education is going to be very interesting. Student ID in Apple Wallet is actually the first place that these access credentials launched a number of years ago. And so students who are walking into a Mac lab or need to use these shared device type terminals will have the opportunity to just walk up with the same credential they used to get into their dorm room or the cafeteria or whatever else it might be and log into a temporary session on the Mac. We also think potentially retail is interesting, manufacturing facilities, but of course we'd love to hear a lot more from you. So as a follow-up to the session, obviously please don't forget to fill out the session survey. We also have contact information for us if you have questions. Oops, don't tap the microphone. So please get in touch and share your feedback with us about where you think this technology might be particularly interesting so that, of course, we can continue to develop capabilities, but then also engage with you on how to make everything work. And of course, if you want to learn more about Platform SSO or you want to fill out that survey, we're going to give you QR codes here so that you can fill those out. But we're hoping that this is a long dialogue. As many of you are familiar with here, Apple releases technologies, and year after year after year, they incrementally improve and grow and expand in use case. And I think we're on this journey together, and we're very excited to see how you all use the technology. So like I mentioned before, if you fill out the survey, you can give us feedback there. But also, if you want to send either of us an email and ask questions, you can do that as well. We're both happy to answer questions, hop on a Zoom call, get on the phone with you, whatever it is, talk through this, link you up with any of the hardware vendors or identity providers, answer questions there. Please feel free to engage with us. And with that, we will open it up to questions. So I hope you all have brought your thinking caps early in the morning and you've had your coffee.
If we could just raise hands, and we will have the microphone brought around the room.
Tom,
that way our friends online could hear.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks guys. So I work in healthcare, and in healthcare we use Imprivata for all our tap-to-login authentication. I also would like to have my employees to have the ability to have their badge in their wallet as well. Mm-hmm. Is there a way these systems could integrate or cooperate? Are you familiar with that? Or any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So Imprivata, some people will probably see this workflow and be like, well, Imprivata does this, don't they? And to some extent, I think from a user experience standpoint, the answer is kind of yes. Except that what Imprivata is doing is, and this is no slight at all to Imprivata, they are taking what is generally a kind of woefully insecure credential format, which is more often than not unencrypted, and they are turning that random badge identifier that's transmitted in the clear, unencrypted, and figuring out who that user is in the identity provider, and then starting that session for the user. This is designed to be a much more secure workflow. Obviously, we're here to talk about macOS today. There is no reason why these can't operate side by side. It is still, both systems are deriving the same digital identity. And so, there doesn't have to be any change in Entra or Okta. They can both still feed up to the same identity provider. We are in talks with Imprivata as well to help them to issue employee badge and Apple Wallet if that's something they're interested in. So the answer to the question is a complex yes. And most of the organizations that we're actually talking to would be operating both of these side by side. Importantly, tap to login doesn't answer a lot of the other workflows like prescribing medication or accessing doors even, right? Because a lot of those readers on the doors are still configured to use these old unencrypted prox cards and things like that. So my dream scenario is that Aliro, much more secure, much more standardized, ends up becoming an option for all of those use cases, and then over time, that Aliro credential derived by your device could be used in all of those applications. But for today, they certainly could work together.
Okay, thanks. Second question. To be honest, I have never heard of Aliro before. Why Aliro and why not something like FIDO2? Is that, yeah? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, good question. And I think that is I don't know. So I worked for Jamf for 10 years, and then I came into the physical access control industry about 2 years ago. So I don't have necessarily the lineage in physical access control that many people who spent their entire career there have. But from what I see, FIDO2 is an IT-based standard. Aliro is a physical access control industry-based standard. And I think what's happened is, like that diagram I showed you earlier, where the physical access industry is not on board with a lot of these common IT or digital identity user workflows, it's another one of those things where it's like, I see the world this way, and they see the world this way, and so they're creating a new standard to continue to do the things that the way they've done for a while. The good news is that, of course, it is an open standard versus the previous versions, which were all closed walled gardens and were controlled by the individual credential providers, so they were not interoperable. Aliro will be interoperable and is much more standards-based, which I think is a good evolution.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, so I know you touched on this a little bit, but I got kind of lost with the Apple account stuff. So would this have full functionality with Android phones, like the tap to login, the express mode, all that stuff?
Yeah, just make sure I understood the question. The speakers are facing out, so I'm kind of getting it a second hand here. You're asking if this will work with an Android phone with tap to login?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, so the Aliro standard is actually, both Apple and Google are on the standards body. Google is supporting the Aliro credential format in Google Wallet. I don't know that Samsung has actually made any comments about Aliro, so I'm not sure about Samsung Wallet. But obviously, if you have a Samsung device, Google Wallet can be installed there. So the answer to the question is yes, you could use an Android device to tap to the NFC reader, have an Aliro credential that works with tap to login. Good questions, but we need some Platform SSO questions.
Hi. With the Authenticated Guest Mode, is that in this sort of setup an all or nothing thing where you can only do Authenticated Guest Mode for users who are tapping in? Or if you had, say, physicians who are like, well, I specifically want my doc this way every time I log in, so I want a persistent user account on here that doesn't go away after I log out. Could you have that live alongside temporary accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be 2 separate configurations within Jamf Pro, and then you're going to obviously scope that appropriately to those groups. But absolutely, you could do that.
Like on the same system?
Oh, on the same system, no. Sorry, I just meant generally blanket statement in your environment. Yes, they can both live side by side, but yes, on the same system, no, it's one or the other.
Okay.
And I think importantly too, another thing to mention around the tap to login technology. So Authenticated Guest Mode is the only version of an account that can leverage that NFC badge tap to log in if you have a standard user account on the device, whether it's an administrator or a standard user, not conflating that terminology, but you have a typical user on the machine. Apple's workflow is to set up Touch ID, right? And so to use Touch ID for your permanent account and your login session. So tap to login won't work with a permanent account on the machine.
So could you create a user account on a system with like Touch ID and then also have other users leveraging Authenticated Guest Mode with the NFC reader?
I don't know, can you mix and match temporary guest accounts and permanent accounts?
It's TBD. It needs to be tested.
That's a great question. Let's be in touch. We're going to test it in the lab.
Yeah.
There actually is even, there's still a couple of bugs that are being worked out in macOS right now. So the workflow can't be tested end to end yet, but we expect a resolution here in a couple of weeks.
This is all good stuff. The jamf.it/PSSO page that I shared earlier, and I saw everybody taking a picture of it, we will get that answer once we're able to validate that. A lot of these questions I'll wind up posting an FAQ on there with these answers. So good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of those sessions where it's like literally everything is hot off the presses.
Yeah.
It's still doughy on the inside. You know, we're testing some of it.
Hi. Basically, I just had a quick question. So it looks like this is all in its infancy. How long before you think we're replacing our JNUC badges with something like this?
We'll have to talk to the JNUC committee, but yeah, that's a good one.
Love it. Yeah, it's a great idea. Fascinating. Yeah, you should send that feedback to JNUC. Love it.
Hi, thanks for all the info. I'm in higher ed. We have a single campus. We've got Apple Wallet stuff already for our badging, so I'm super excited to do this. What's the future of Jamf Connect? I haven't heard a peep about it during this whole thing, so I'm kind of under the assumption we're in a similar place to Nomad when Jamf Connect came out.
Yeah, great question, and I knew that one. I was waiting for that one to come up. So when Jamf acquired Orchard and Grove back in 2019, 2018, we acquired Orchard and Grove and Nomad and essentially built Jamf Connect to solve a challenge that was out there. And for the last 6 years, Jamf Connect was able to solve that challenge. Now Jamf is leading into Apple's innovation with Platform SSO. We are supporting all the Platform SSO experiences that are out there, like password sync, tap to login, secure enclave, simplified setup. So Jamf Connect is not going to be going away. Today with Platform SSO, Okta and Microsoft Entra ID are the two identity providers that support Platform SSO. Anybody in the room here using Google? Yeah, we got a bunch of hands, people using Google. That PSSO survey that I put up there, please fill that out and indicate that you're using Google as your IDP. I was actually asked by Google how many customers would like to use Platform SSO with Google. So if you could fill that out and express your interest in there, I will pass that along to Google. So Jamf Connect is obviously still going to be extremely valuable in higher education, K through 12, any organization that is using Google identity. With that being said, like when it comes to just password sync capabilities, discussions that I had at Octane 2 weeks ago, discussions that I've been having yesterday and today at JNUC, most organizations are at this like pivotal point where they're like, okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and take any new Macs and they're gonna get Platform SSO. Anything existing is gonna get Jamf Connect, and as we refresh, we'll have that point where everything at some point is on Platform SSO. Internally at Jamf, we are exploring the other capabilities that are bundled with Jamf Connect. So you have things like privilege elevation. Self-Service Plus was the big thing last year, so we're looking at how can we move things like privilege elevation into Self-Service Plus. Jamf Connect is also a broad term because one of the Jamf Connect SKUs that was being sold gave you stuff like ZTNA capabilities. So With that being said, Jamf Connect is not going away. It still serves a purpose. It's just we're in a pivotal moment where you might have to make that choice. Am I going to be using Jamf Connect or Platform SSO? And if you want my honest opinion, use Platform SSO if your identity provider supports it. Jamf doesn't want to hold you back from using these native Apple technologies.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Really good questions so far.
So I got 2 questions. First off, do these readers itself behave any type like a storage device? Do we have to put an exception in if we've got a lockdown for USBs?
Can you repeat the question for me? It's hard to hear up here. Do the readers act as a storage device? Is that you said?
Yeah. Do the readers behave any way like a storage device? Because we've got like a USB storage device lockdown. Do we have to put exceptions in for devices like this?
Yeah, so the readers, should not show up as a storage device, and they don't have any functionality to act like that.
Yeah.
And the second question is, if you've got managed Apple IDs, I've heard from Apple that you don't have Apple Pay as an ability after that. How do you guys get around that challenge when it comes to, say, a BYOD device where a user's just like, wait, I have no access to Apple Pay?
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, managed Apple accounts shouldn't limit Apple Pay capability anymore. If the managed Apple account is trying to add the Apple Pay card, maybe that's the situation. But actually with BYOD devices, there are ways that you can add both Apple accounts and have credentials go to a specific Apple account. And so I don't think I've ever run into a situation where somebody was not able to commingle personal Apple accounts, managed Apple accounts, and couldn't use Apple Pay. So I'd be happy to talk through the specifics of it with you. But there are a number of things there. Number 1 is like order of login to Apple accounts. Number 2 is how an Apple Business Manager, you specify how the Apple accounts are allowed to be used. There's a discretion where you can say no personal Apple accounts or only managed Apple accounts, that kind of thing. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, we can kind of talk you through the nuance there.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, at Jamf, I have my personal phone here, but it's enrolled into Jamf's BYOD program. I have a SwiftConnect badge with Express Mode, so anytime I go to the office, I'm just badging in with my personal phone, but I still have my Amex cards and everything else in Apple Wallet.
And you enrolled with account-driven user enrollment with
Yes.
a managed Apple account, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to be able to survive without Apple Pay.
Just to piggyback off his question, do you have to do account-driven enrollment for SwiftConnect to work?
No, not at all.
You could do BYOD without it being enrolled, so it's actually just a personal device. They download SwiftConnect from the App Store and configure it in some way, and then they could use their badge.
Yeah, there's there's the obvious benefits of an MDM deployed app around user experience with app config and things like that, but there's no reason somebody can't go to the App Store, download the app, plug in the URL information to connect to the back end, and then provision a credential, so long as they can authenticate, right? If they're allowed to authenticate, then they can provision a badge.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
All right, so I understand the necessity of an identity provider for this workflow. Is there like a limitation to, like, let's say I have an organization that has a retailer.com and a retailer.global domain. They're in different OUs, different tenants, but still report to the same identity provider. Would this workflow be able to support both domains for that kind of authentication method?
There is no issue from a credential standpoint. We do skim mapping to any number of identity domains, so that's not a problem. With regard to Platform SSO, I'm not sure if there is a limitation there. I wouldn't imagine so.
No, I mean, organizations acquire other organizations, and there's tons of domains out there, so yeah.
Would you just need to upload both certificates to that PSSO profile that you're pushing out?
Yeah, there'd be some mappings and things that would have to happen with the identity provider, yeah.
Any other questions? These are great questions.
Oh, we got one right here in the middle.
could you speak on like the readers themselves and how they interact with Macs? Could it be something where like the reader is hoteled like on a dock and a Mac is brought to it, or could it be known beforehand? Like, what's the kind of trust relationship? Like, you have to be logged in to trust the device first. Like, how's the, if there's a real hoteling kind of situation, or is it something where the device has to be known before logon's attempted?
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to. I know if you plug in a USB device into a modern macOS operating system version, you're asked to trust it. I don't know if that's true for readers. I'll have to double check. I don't know that I've ever seen that before when I have tested it, but I can get back to you. If you want to send me an email, I'll make sure that I follow up with you. I have a whole slew of those readers, and I can test in a modern environment and see if I get that pop-up.
I will say that when I was testing a couple weeks ago on macOS 26, I was not prompted to trust my reader.
And these readers are operating in a mode that's kind of like it's like a pass-through mode. It's really just reading the data and not doing anything with it and just passing it down the wire. So it looks and feels a little bit more like a keyboard, I think, to the system than anything. And correct me if I'm wrong. I plugged a keyboard into my Mac for a long time. You don't have to trust your keyboard, do you? I don't know. I don't think so. So that's my understanding is that's kind of the way that the system sees the readers, is not any sort of need to be trusted device. But I'm happy to double check for you, and I can give you a definitive answer.
Thank you.
Yep. We have time for one more question. Anybody else with a question? All right. And of course, if you have questions after this and you don't want to raise your hand, we'll be outside the room and you can ask us afterwards.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thank you for the awesome presentation. I'm assuming that File Vault must not be enabled on the computer for this to work, or can you bypass that?
No, Platform SSO supports File Vault.
Right, but if I come to a workstation that has been restarted, can I authenticate File Vault?
Yeah. Yeah, you should be able to authenticate File Vault. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good test example. I don't know why it wouldn't work, but we haven't specifically tested that.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, a lot of it just comes to, like Josh mentioned, there's still some things that need to get worked out for this to be like production ready. So our testing has been kind of limited with this, but yeah, I mean, once we're able to test more, we could definitely validate these questions, and we'll post them on jamf.it/PSSO.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. A lot of great questions.
So much.
Hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you have other questions for us, meet us out in the hallway, send us an email, whatever, but have a great rest of your JNUC, all right?
Thank you.
See ya. Cool.